I guess I'm here because, I mean, I've talked a lot about like race and gender on campus. I've been like a pretty close part of that. I do a lot of work with CAMD in my free time. And I was lucky enough to get picked for the panel. And I think like, I mean, I knew the panel was going to be amazing because I knew who, like the people who were with me on it, and I knew like how diverse and like how like honest and candid everyone was going to be because I know them. But it was like better than I could have imagined. I mean, the honesty, like, and how much like I learned, I just never expected, you know? I was sitting there on the panel, like staring at everyone else who's speaking, just like, oh my God, like I feel like I've talked to you so much, but I've never heard about that before. And like, it was just incredible to learn about. So I talked a lot about what it was to be Chinese American, mostly because honestly, in like every space I've been invited to before about like stuff about like identity, race and gender, I've never seen a Chinese American, or for that matter, an Asian American, like being a leader in that discussion. And I wanted to like talk about it, right? And so I guess like from a young age, if someone was to ask me what emotion I associated with being Chinese, it would be like being ashamed and being lonely. And I think from like a young age as a Chinese American, you're taught that you should be ashamed of being Chinese and you want to be as un-Chinese as possible. Like I remember, I told a couple anecdotes, and I mean, I remember when I was younger, you know, people who forgot my name would call me like the Chinese kid or like the Asian kid. And once I got older, they started labeling me like Chink and Gook, and that just became my regular nickname, you know? And I remember this one time, we were watching a Peanuts documentary. I didn't talk about it, but we were watching a Peanuts documentary about the Transcontinental Railroad, and my entire class just turned around, pointing and laughing at me because we noticed that the cartoonist drew like the Chinese slave workers who died building the railroad that literally tied this nation together, with slits for eyes, just pointing and laughing at me. And it got to the point where every single word and thing that people said to me, the way that people treated me, just made me feel like I can't be Chinese anymore. I need to be like as white and as American as possible. But of course, that was never an option for me. Of course not, right? And I think like now when I look back on it, I'm still like so ashamed. And I'm not ashamed of being Chinese anymore. I am so proud of being Chinese. I'm taking a gap year just to live in China for a year so I can like connect with my heritage a little bit more. But I think I'm ashamed of like how I treated my parents and how I was ashamed before. And I think a lot of people forget why Chinese Americans are here. And like, it's not like we just came here to colonize your country and take over something. We came here for a reason. We came here because our lives in China were so much worse and so much more challenging and so much more difficult than like we hoped our lives here would be. I mean, my parents came from rural China. They grew up as farmers. They starved for nights on end. And then their highest point when they were in China was making $200 a year, you know? And even when my brother was born, my older brother, who, you know, is living in Dubai now with like a great life, he starved for weeks on end because they just couldn't afford food. They couldn't afford clothing. My grandmother had to beg just to send my dad to school. And that's begging on feet that were bound and broken, right? And so I think that when people look at Chinese Americans, they're like, oh, they're different. They came here for different reasons. And they forget our reasons for coming aren't so different from other immigrants, from like European immigrants. All we wanted, it was a simple request. We came here because we thought that we would have a better life. In Chinese, America is literally 美国, which means like the magnificent country. And I think we were sorely mistaken. And we found something where, yeah, we've achieved in terms of class and in terms of like economic and financial status, but we have always, and I think for a long time, we will always be seen as like the foreigner. And I don't know if we'll ever in the near future be able to like say, I'm American, which sucks because I feel just as American, if not more, than all the people who tell me that I'm not. And I think like those are the big things that I really wanted to hit on tonight. I just want to say like thank you so much for listening. I think that for a lot of us here, you know, we're speaking from the perspective of like marginalized groups of people, whether it be based on sexual orientation, class, gender, race, whatever, right? And we're used to A, not being listened to, and B, being told that our problems aren't really problems, especially in the case of Asians and Asian Americans. And it was the most amazing, rare experience to be heard tonight in the way that I was. So thank you.
I'm Kai Kornegay. I'm a senior. I live in Goodyear, Arizona. I'm the co-head of this year's GSA, and I'm also the coordinator for AMP, which is the Athlete and Mentoring Program. I definitely feel more comfortable in Black spaces than I do in queer spaces. I think that in GSA this year anyways, and last year too actually, the board's really diverse, so I think that we've made a greater effort to make meetings more inclusive of people of color, of people of non-binary genders, but outside of the context of Andover's GSA, I definitely feel more comfortable in Black spaces talking about my queerness than I do in queer spaces talking about my Blackness. And I think that has to do with the fact that in a lot of queer spaces, the dialogue is dominated by usually upper middle class or wealthy white gay men. And so they do have a lot of privilege in a lot of ways. So I think that because most of the other people in queer spaces that are vocal in queer spaces tend to have privilege, there's a barrier where I feel like I can't discuss the ways in which I'm not privileged because they don't experience the same thing. And we do sort of butt heads, and I think it's hard for people for gay white men, and not just only gay white men, but for people that do have a lot of other privileges to realize that being oppressed, it's not just like one size fits all, that being Black and being queer and being a woman, that these all they're intermingled, and that does make my experience different. The sisterhood, so like the Black Latina girls on campus, we formed an affinity group where we've talked about issues relating to us, and I think that's really bolstered my confidence and comfortability talking about these issues. So I felt like I was finally in a place where I could discuss this openly, so I jumped at the opportunity to really be the voice that I wish I had when I was a lower. I just want to make sure that the community knows that I didn't sit on that panel and talk about my experiences to in any way say that the Andover community is this terrible, terrible place, because I think anyone that knows me knows that I have a lot of love for Andover. I think I was able to sit on that panel because this community is one that's supportive and open enough where I could feel safe in talking about my experiences. We already are leaps and bounds ahead of our peer schools and even some colleges and universities, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still room to grow. And I think that we as a community, we have to work together to make sure that we do get to a place where we're safe and we're affirming and we're accepting of different people.
I am, together with Debbie Murphy, one of the co-chairs of the Co-Ed at 40 committee, and we were given the task of finding various ways to commemorate the 40th anniversary of co-education at PA. And we didn't want to just do celebration. We wanted to use the opportunity to push the conversation about gender along in various ways. I thought the panelists were extraordinary both in their insight and also in their honesty. One of my concerns is about gender justice and gender equality. It's both a kind of a personal commitment and professional interest at the same time. Everybody has a race, regardless of what color you are. Everybody has a gender. So these are not just women's issues or people of color issues. They're everybody's issues. I hope everybody takes educational advantage of the conversation that's going on among students to learn more about race and gender and how it affects them.